Is the Shroud of Turin really the shroud that belonged to Jesus? That is what we're going to see in this discussion today, the evidence for the shroud. Stick till the end because we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to explain why I believe it really is the shroud that belongs to Jesus, and I hope you enjoy the video.
Mel Gibson has shocked the world once again, but this time, not with a film. What he uncovered hidden within the ancient Shroud of Turin has left scientists and believers speechless. No one can explain how it came to be. It's as if science and faith are woven together in a single piece of cloth. His discovery has blurred the line between belief and proof, forcing both skeptics and followers to question everything they thought they knew. What did Mel really see in that sacred fabric? Could the shroud truly bear the image of Jesus Christ? Today, modern technology is doing something once thought impossible, bringing religion and science together. Because until science steps in, everything remains a miracle. And now, through this same science, a living, breathing 3D image of the man on the Shroud of Turin has emerged, an image that could change how we see faith forever. But this isn't just about a discovery, it's about how Mel Gibson found his true purpose. Mel's life has always read like a story, one filled with triumph, pain, and something that feels almost divine. Before he became a global icon, his world revolved around theater and imagination. Acting wasn't about fame for him. It was a way to escape, to express what words alone couldn't. In the small theaters of Australia, a young Mel Gibson began shaping his craft. No one could have predicted that this quiet, intense performer would one day become one of the most magnetic figures in Hollywood. His presence was raw, emotional, and undeniably human. That spark became a wildfire when he starred in Mad Max, a film that changed Australian cinema forever. The role turned him from a struggling artist into a commanding screen presence. He played a man caught between justice and vengeance, a reflection of the inner battles he was fighting himself. The film's success opened every door imaginable. Audiences couldn't get enough of his intensity, his charm, and the quiet sorrow behind his eyes. Hollywood took notice, and soon, Mel Gibson was thrust into the global spotlight. Audiences couldn't get enough of him, his intensity, his effortless charm, and that quiet sadness hidden behind his eyes. Hollywood took notice, and before long, Mel Gibson was thrust into the global spotlight. Then came Lethal Weapon, the film that turned him into an international star. As an action hero, Mel brought something audiences hadn't seen before: vulnerability. He wasn't just a tough guy who fought villains. He was a man haunted by pain, doubt, and loss. People saw the truth in his eyes and believed every emotion he brought to the screen. But behind all the fame, Mel was still fighting his own battles. Success came fast, but it came with a cost. The temptations of Hollywood were everywhere: the glamour, the power, the constant attention. It was intoxicating, but beneath the bright lights, it all started to feel hollow. The more he accomplished, the more he began to question what it really meant. He could feel a pull inside him, a struggle between the roar of the world's applause and a quiet voice within that longed for something deeper, something eternal. During this time of soaring fame and inner turmoil, memories from his childhood began to resurface. Mel Columcille Gerard Gibson was born in the mid-1950s in Peekskill, New York, one of 11 children in a large, close-knit Catholic family. His father, Hutton Gibson, was a deeply religious man who believed faith should guide every decision in life. His mother, Anne, carried that same conviction with calm strength and grace. The Gibson home was filled with discipline, prayer, and a constant sense that God was always near. But as Mel grew, the world outside began to change. The Vietnam War was casting a dark shadow over America, and Hutton feared that his sons might be drafted. So in search of peace and safety, he made a life-altering decision. The family would move to Australia. That single choice changed Mel's life forever. The new country offered a sense of calm and distance from the chaos of war, but it also left him feeling isolated, far from everything he'd ever known. Still, it was in that faraway land that Mel's destiny truly began to take shape. Australia gave him something he'd never had before: freedom, space to dream, to explore, and to discover who he really was. In Sydney, he stumbled upon the world of theater, and from the moment he stepped into it, he was captivated. He enrolled at the National Institute of Dramatic Art, where his natural talent quickly stood out. On stage, Mel found what he'd been searching for: purpose, belonging, and a way to understand the human heart. For him, acting wasn't just performance, it was a form of worship. The stage became his first altar, a sacred space where he could express the unseen depths of the soul and reach for something divine. But as the years passed and his fame soared, that old restlessness began to return. The more films he made, the more he felt a quiet emptiness inside. Acting alone was no longer enough. He wanted to tell stories that mattered, stories that carried meaning, truth, and faith. That longing led him to step behind the camera. Directing gave him a new kind of creative power, not to control, but to create, to inspire. He wanted to make films that could touch hearts and awaken something eternal within people. His first great triumph as a director came with Braveheart. It wasn't just a historical epic. It was a story about courage, sacrifice, and belief in something greater than oneself. Many saw it as a reflection of faith itself, the battle for freedom, mirroring the soul's struggle for salvation. Yet Braveheart was only the beginning. Mel's true calling was still waiting, something far more personal and profound. When The Passion of the Christ was released, the world was not ready for what it witnessed. It wasn't another Hollywood blockbuster. It was a raw, soul-shaking depiction of the final hours of Jesus Christ. Mel directed the film with a level of devotion and intensity that stunned both believers and critics alike. Every detail was crafted with reverence: the language, the costumes, the rituals, even the way the light fell across a scene. He didn't want beauty for the sake of cinema. He wanted truth. Because to Mel, truth didn't need polish. It needed honesty. The film divided audiences. Some were deeply moved, praising its emotional power and spiritual depth. Others condemned it for its unflinching brutality. But no one walked away unchanged. What couldn't be denied was the impact. Audiences wept, prayed, and walked out of theaters forever changed. For many, The Passion of the Christ reignited a faith they thought they had lost. For others, it stirred profound questions about suffering, forgiveness, and the boundless nature of divine love. But the film's success came with a heavy personal cost. Critics accused Mel Gibson of spreading division, and old controversies from his past began to resurface. The pressure of fame, combined with his own mistakes and inner struggles, pulled him into one of the darkest periods of his life. Yet even in that darkness, Mel began to see something deeper, a realization that his battles weren't just personal, but spiritual. The very film he made to honor Christ ended up breaking him open, revealing his flaws, his pain, and his desperate need for grace. That experience changed him forever. The man who once lived for fame, applause, and success began to seek something higher, something eternal. He became more reflective, quieter, and more aware of how fragile life truly is. Years later, when Mel Gibson began to speak about Christ again, it wasn't through another movie or script. This time, it came through something far more mysterious and powerful, a centuries-old relic that many believe carries the image of Jesus himself. The Shroud of Turin would become one of the most astonishing revelations of his life. For centuries, this single piece of ancient linen has captured the attention of the world, haunting scientists, inspiring believers, and confounding skeptics. Known as the Shroud of Turin, it has been guarded, studied, and worshipped for generations. Within its delicate threads lies a mystery that continues to challenge everything we think we know about faith, death, and resurrection. To some, it's nothing more than an ancient religious artifact. To others, it is the most powerful physical evidence of Christ's crucifixion and his resurrection. But the story of the Shroud of Turin isn't just about faith. It's a story of mystery, science, and the unexplainable connection between heaven and earth. The shroud itself is a long strip of linen bearing the faint image of a man who appears to have endured unimaginable suffering. His face is serene, yet his body tells another story. Deep wounds on his hands and feet, gashes across his back, and punctures around his head, as if from a crown of thorns. For centuries, the Catholic Church has safeguarded this sacred cloth, believing it to be the very burial shroud that once wrapped the body of Jesus after his crucifixion. Its home is the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, where millions of pilgrims have traveled over the years to gaze upon it in reverence. The earliest known record of the shroud dates back to medieval France, where it was first displayed publicly before being transferred to Italy for protection. From the moment it appeared, the world was divided. Some hailed it as holy, others dismissed it as an elaborate hoax. But everything changed at the end of the 19th century. In 1898, an amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was granted permission to take the first ever photographs of the shroud. When he developed the negatives in his darkroom, what emerged before his eyes left him utterly stunned, a clear, lifelike image of a man's face. What had looked faint and indistinct on the cloth became hauntingly real in photographic form. The discovery sent shockwaves across the world. Newspapers called it a miracle. Scientists raced to study it. Believers saw it as divine confirmation that Jesus had truly lived, suffered, and died as the scriptures described. Over the decades, countless tests and studies were conducted to unlock the shroud's secrets. But the more it was examined, the deeper the mystery grew. The linen revealed no trace of paint, pigment, or dye. The image wasn't painted, drawn, or etched by human hands. Instead, the fibers appeared to be scorched only on their surface, as though touched by an intense burst of energy, an imprint left behind without burning through. The very idea that something like this could have happened 2,000 years ago seemed impossible. Yet there it was, staring back at humanity from a simple piece of cloth. And yet there it was, silent, fragile, and filled with unanswered questions. The Bible tells us that after Jesus' crucifixion, his body was wrapped in linen by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, before being laid in the tomb. While Scripture never specifically names the Shroud of Turin, it clearly describes such a burial cloth. The connection between the biblical account and this mysterious relic is impossible to ignore. Historians who examined the shroud were struck by its fine herringbone weave, a pattern consistent with high-quality fabrics used in the 1st century. Under the microscope, researchers also found traces of pollen from plants that grow only around Jerusalem. Even tiny fragments of limestone embedded in the fibers matched those found in ancient tombs near the Holy City, giving the shroud an unmistakable geographical link to the land where Christ once walked. Each new discovery deepened the mystery. How could a single piece of cloth hold so many clues that pointed directly to the time and place of Jesus' death? Scientists from all over the world were desperate to uncover the truth. In the 1970s, a group of researchers known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STURP, was granted rare permission to study the relic up close. Using advanced cameras, X-rays, and microscopes, they analyzed every inch of the image. What they found left even the experts stunned. The image on the shroud could not be reproduced by any known method, ancient or modern. It wasn't painted, it wasn't photographed, it wasn't burned or stained. It was something entirely different, something no one could explain. Then, in the 1980s, the mystery took a shocking turn. A team of scientists performed carbon dating on small samples of the cloth, and the results suggested it dated back only to the medieval era, not the time of Christ. The announcement made headlines around the world. Skeptics declared the shroud a medieval forgery, and for a time, it seemed the mystery had finally been solved. But years later, new evidence surfaced, revealing that the carbon dating tests had been performed on a repaired section of the cloth, one that had been patched after a fire in the 15th century. That small corner contained newer material, which had distorted the results. When this revelation came to light, everything changed again. The faith of millions who believed in the shroud's authenticity grew stronger than ever. What was once dismissed as myth suddenly seemed real again, a silent witness to something beyond science, beyond time, and beyond doubt. As research continued, each new discovery seemed to challenge the one before it. Some scientists claimed there was no way to prove that the shroud dated back to the time of Christ, while others were convinced that every clue pointed directly to it. With time, advances in technology allowed for even deeper and more precise analysis. When previously classified data from earlier studies was re-examined, one fact became clear. No group of experts had ever reached the same conclusion. The shroud remained exactly what it had always been, a crossroads between faith and doubt, belief and disbelief. Then came perhaps the most astonishing revelation of all. New studies revealed that the image on the cloth appeared to have been formed by a burst of radiation, a sudden, powerful flash of light at the atomic level. No technology known to man could reproduce such an effect without completely destroying the fabric. The energy required to create that kind of imprint was beyond anything humanly possible. For many, this wasn't just science, it was a glimpse of the divine. What made it even more extraordinary was how precisely the details on the shroud aligned with the biblical account of the crucifixion. The wounds on the hands and feet appeared exactly where the nails would have pierced the flesh. The marks across the back matched the scars of Roman scourging. Around the forehead and scalp were tiny punctures, consistent with the wounds of a crown of thorns. On the right side of the body, a large gash mirrored the spear wound described in the Gospel of John. Even the posture of the figure suggested a man who had been crucified and then laid in burial. But the mysteries didn't end there. Under microscopic examination, scientists discovered pollen grains embedded in the linen, pollen from plants that bloom only around Jerusalem during springtime, the very season of Passover, when the crucifixion of Jesus took place. Every new discovery seemed to whisper the same haunting possibility, that this fragile cloth might truly carry the image of the moment when death was defeated. Researchers also found faint circular imprints near the eyes, patterns that perfectly matched the design of coins from the reign of Emperor Tiberius, who ruled Rome during the 1st century. In ancient times, such coins were often placed over the eyes of the dead as part of burial customs, a symbolic offering for the soul's passage into the afterlife. The connection was uncanny, as if every fiber of that ancient cloth carried a whisper from history itself. When Mel Gibson spoke about the shroud, he didn't speak as a filmmaker or a celebrity. He spoke as a man who had seen too much evidence to ignore. What he revealed during his conversation with Joe Rogan left even hardened skeptics questioning what they thought they knew. Could it be that, after all these centuries, the face imprinted on that sacred linen truly belonged to the Son of God? It became known as the confession that shook the world. This wasn't just another Hollywood interview or a press stop for a new movie. When Mel Gibson sat across from Joe Rogan, the atmosphere was different, quiet, heavy, and charged with something deeper than fame. The world knew Gibson as an actor, a director, and a man often surrounded by controversy. But this time, he came not to promote a film, but to share an experience, a story that reached beyond cinema and touched the edges of the divine. What he revealed in that moment sent ripples through millions of minds around the world, forcing people to look again at an ancient mystery they thought had long been explained. The setting was the Joe Rogan Experience, a show known for its raw honesty and fearless conversations. Joe, ever curious about the unexplained, steered their discussion toward topics of faith, miracles, and the thin line between belief and science. And that's when Mel Gibson began to speak, quietly, deliberately, about something that would forever change how people saw the Shroud of Turin, and perhaps how they saw faith itself. Mel sat calmly across from Joe, his tone steady, but his eyes revealing something deeper, emotion, conviction, and a quiet sense of awe. He didn't dodge a single question. Every answer carried weight, the kind that only comes from a man who has seen something that changed him forever. What followed wasn't a debate. It was a confession. It felt as if Mel had been holding on to a secret for years, one that had finally reached the moment it needed to be spoken aloud. In the years leading up to that interview, Mel had been working tirelessly on The Passion of the Christ 2, a continuation that sought to explore what truly happened after the crucifixion. But this time, he wasn't relying on Hollywood scripts or creative imagination. He went searching for truth. He dove deep into history, studying ancient texts, consulting theologians, and examining early Christian manuscripts. Yet one discovery stood above all the rest: the Shroud of Turin. The more he studied it, the more he became convinced that this wasn't just a relic. It was something beyond explanation. At first, Gibson's interest in the shroud was simple curiosity, but over time it became something profoundly personal. He pored over scientific reports, microscopic analyses, and historical records, all pointing toward a startling possibility. The shroud dated back to the very time and place of Christ. He learned that its weave pattern matched the style of fine linen produced in Judea during the 1st century. He read about pollen grains embedded in the fibers, species that bloomed only around Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago. Each detail drew him closer to a single, inescapable conclusion. This cloth might not just be a symbol of faith, it might be the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ. Then came something that changed everything. While researching, Mel found new studies suggesting that advanced imaging technology had confirmed what earlier scientists had claimed. The image on the shroud wasn't painted, printed, or created by any known human method. That revelation struck him deeply. It wasn't just film inspiration, it was a spiritual awakening. For Gibson, the shroud became more than an artifact. It became a bridge between faith and fact, science and the divine. So when Joe Rogan finally asked him point-blank what he believed, Mel didn't hesitate. He explained that the image on the shroud showed a man who had endured every wound described in the Gospels: scourging across the shoulders, nails through the hands and feet, a spear wound in the side, and the unmistakable punctures from a crown of thorns pressed into his scalp. He pointed out that the linen's weave matched 1st century materials, and that the pollen embedded in the fibers dated back more than 2,000 years, all signs that the shroud was no ordinary relic. Mel went on to mention another detail that few people had ever heard before. He explained that faint impressions of coins bearing the image of Emperor Tiberius had been discovered near the eyes of the figure on the shroud, a clue that perfectly matched a Roman burial custom from the 1st century. But what came next left Joe Rogan, and millions who later watched the interview, completely speechless. Mel described how modern studies had revealed that the image on the shroud wasn't created by any known human method. Instead, scientists had found evidence suggesting that it was formed by a sudden burst of radiant energy, so intense it could only be compared to an atomic flash. There was no paint, no pigment, no chemical process that could explain it. Nothing man-made could have produced such an image without burning the cloth entirely. Mel paused, his voice steady but full of conviction, and said that this kind of energy could only come from something beyond the physical world, a supernatural event, perhaps even the very moment of the resurrection itself. As the conversation deepened, he connected these findings to the words of Christ in the Gospel of John, when Jesus declared that although his body would be destroyed, he would rise again on the 3rd day. To Mel, the shroud wasn't just an artifact. It was physical proof of that promise, a silent witness to the exact instant when life returned to what had been lifeless. The impact of his words was immediate and explosive. Around the world, scientists, theologians, and skeptics began revisiting the evidence. Some researchers who had long dismissed the shroud's authenticity took another look at the data, realizing that the original carbon dating tests had been performed on a repaired section, not on the ancient fabric itself. Others, once skeptical, admitted that the energy burst responsible for the image could not be explained by any known natural process. The possibility that it might capture an event beyond human comprehension sent shockwaves through both scientific and religious communities. Faith leaders called Gibson's confession a powerful testimony, while critics argued over whether it should be seen as faith or fact. But regardless of where anyone stood, one thing was certain. Mel Gibson had reignited one of history's greatest and most sacred mysteries. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the next video appearing on your screen.